Cargos. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I haven't seen you for like a couple months. I think the last time was when when I did your school's professional development thing.
Actually, I think it was the JALT Kyoto event.
Oh,
Uh,
that's right.
that was maybe last month. Yes. So it's been a couple weeks, but it's been a little bit less time than you think.
That's right. No, I'm in a blur these days. You can tell by the bags under my eyes. But yeah, I first met you actually out of the blue. You messaged me and said you wanted me to come and talk at your school. And
That's
then that
right.
was when I first met you. And then I saw you at the GELT National Conference talking
That's
about the
right.
very topic we're going to be talking about today, global Englishes. And that's where I think I asked you to come in and talk today.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I had seen you speak, and I think it was an OTJ event at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I was really impressed with what you had to say. And so, yes, I invited you to come and speak at Tokyo Kasei University, which is where I teach. I'm a full-time lecturer there. So, and it was a great event. So thank you again. And I'm so
Thank
happy
you
to
very
be
much.
here today.
Thank you very much. Before we begin, though, I wanted to take a few minutes out, if you don't mind, and
Not at all.
talk about something that's kind of important to a lot of people who know, not just a friend of mine, but a friend of everyone's. His name is Joel Laurier. And for those who don't know, Joel Laurier is a fine gentleman who's been around JALT for quite a little while, done some really great things, helped a lot of people. And now he's in a position where he kind of needs our help. And if you don't know, Joel has a need for a kidney transplant, to put it quite bluntly. He has the kidney. He has a donor. They're matched. They're ready to go. Unfortunately, in a capitalist society, what you need above that is money. And it takes a lot of money to not only get a kidney transplant, it takes a lot of money actually to pay for the approximately a year when you can't work. You're kind of laid up in bed and just letting the kidney sort of take its time to get used to you, and you get used to your kidney. So he's not going to be working for almost a year or around a year. So Stephen Herder took it upon himself to raise a wonderful campaign to put together some money for Joel, and it raised a pretty good chunk of cash there. You can see it. Okay, 1.6 million, over 1.6 million. Fantastic work by Stephen. Unfortunately, that's still nowhere near enough money. If you think about that in terms of a year's income, basically is not, or just barely over 50% of what you would consider poverty wages, or basically my yearly income. You need more than that, because beyond that, you have to pay for the transplant. And unfortunately, turns out it's a lot more expensive than people first thought. So here's the deal. The original fundraising campaign was supposed to go until Valentine's Day. Lovely thought on Stephen's part. But Stephen has said that if there are people who are still willing to contribute, and Joel can use as much help as he can, until February 28th, as it says right there, until February 28th, okay, you can email Stephen and tell him, hey, Steve, here's my PayPal, and here's I'm going to donate via PayPal. Let's make that arrangement. And yeah, and Steve will still take the money and make sure it gets to Joel. Think about a little bit of a donation if you can. Joel, I think, has helped enough people, mentoring students, mentoring fellow teachers, doing his presentations. Yeah, and I think it would be a really nice thing to do. So I hope that helped a bit, Stephen. Now, Kelly, we have here a couple people in the Zoom room, and as my standard refrain goes, guys, I'm going to be keeping you muted for about 15 minutes, 10 minutes into the hour, until we get a chance to speak to Kelly herself. And after people have had a chance to let her speak her own words, then we'll open this up for conversation. If you're watching us on Facebook in the live stream, please write any comments, any questions that you have in the comment field, and I'll make sure they get up to Kelly herself. Okay. Should I begin with a definition? What is the idea of a global English?
Sure. So when we talk about global Englishes, we often use this term as kind of an umbrella term when we're talking about research in applied linguistics. Global Englishes encompasses the fields of world Englishes, English as an international language, English as a lingua franca. But what we're really meaning is we're talking about all of the different varieties and types of Englishes that are spoken by diverse users all around the world. So, of course, there are the quote unquote standard English varieties that are typically taught in a traditional EFL classroom, like American English, British English. But there are lots of Englishes all over the world. And I think now teachers are starting to introduce students more and more to the diversity of Englishes. But when you think about our students today, they are going to be using English, and we teachers of English and speakers of English are using English in a globalized world, and the people that we speak with and the interactions that we have, they're not necessarily taking place in this sort of textbook standard English. There are lots of different communication strategies and things that are necessary in order to really communicate in an international globalized setting. And I think in a traditional English classroom, we don't really think about this, and we don't really conceive of the fact that, oh, probably the person that my student is going to be speaking with is not this, American or British native speaker that the textbook presents and that the textbook audio presents. It's going to be somebody totally different who has a totally different voice and uses English that doesn't necessarily map on to what this textbook is presenting. And so I think it's really, really important to think about that as a teacher, and to consider, well, to what extent do I need to introduce my students to different kinds of Englishes? And then what kinds of Englishes should I be introducing them to? And perhaps how should I be thinking about English in a more global sense, not only in my classroom, but just in a general sense?
Um, when did you, everybody has their sort of awakening moment to ideas like this. And when did you start to sort of cotton onto this as something that you want to present, and ended up actually being able to present it at the national conference? Is this something that you were studying all the way through your graduate work, or is this something new in terms of your field of view?
Yeah, this is a great question. Definitely when I started teaching, this idea of global Englishes was completely off my radar. Full disclosure, I started teaching English in Japan at a small language school in Tokyo. And I was 22 years old, and I was pretty much fresh out of undergraduate school. I didn't have a ton of teaching experience, nor did I have a ton of TESOL training. I sort of had the bare minimum that was required for me to land this job. And I really didn't consider, you know, global Englishes, or really anything beyond the knowledge that I had about the English language, which was, of course, bound within these American cultural and linguistic frameworks. And so, no, I didn't really come upon this idea until later in my career. Um, but I started to sort of become aware of it as I was working in that first job. And I think one of the things that I noticed particularly was how the native speaker was sort of raised and put on this pedestal. And I saw it at my old job, where I had a colleague who's a dear friend. He is Japanese, and his English is, phenomenal. Uh,
Mhm.
he probably knows more words than I do, if we're being honest. But he would be passed over for certain jobs, like within the school, certain classes or certain contracts. that the school would sort of dole out to different teachers because he wasn't a native speaker. And I saw that and I was like, well, he has objectively more experience than I do. And his English is just as good, if not better than mine in many ways. And, why am I getting these sort of privileged or better jobs, or why am I being considered for more of these classes? And that really didn't settle well with me. And it sort of made me more curious about these ideas of native speakerism, and because I was really uncomfortable. Like, why I
Did your colleague themselves feel a little bit disappointed, or they noted that, Kelly, I don't want you to feel bad about it, but like, why you as opposed to me? Or did they go, well, Kelly, of course, you're a native speaker and I'm just Japanese? What was their side? On what side was their attitude on this issue?
It was a bit of both, I would say. He
Interesting.
was my colleague recognized that the students wanted a native speaker, and he couldn't deliver that as a Japanese. He just couldn't. And so he understood that that was the reason why some of these jobs were going to me and not to him, or not to some of the other people working at our school. And he sort of understood that and accepted it, but it was a conversation that we had. And that was sort of, I think, the beginning of my awakening to this topic. And there were other things too. I remember at that same job, I was in charge of teaching a seminar about pronunciation. And actually, the people in the class were teachers, just like me. They were mostly Japanese, so Japanese teachers of English, and they were mostly working at junior high schools and high schools. And I think I was teaching pronunciation, and I was also teaching some writing stuff in that particular seminar. But anyway, why I bring up this story is I remember very vividly that at the end of this seminar, one of the teachers raised her hand and stood up and was like, I want to teach my students pronunciation, but I'm so embarrassed about my English, and my English is so bad, and my pronunciation is so bad. So I usually just play CDs. Like, is there anything I can do to get my pronunciation better so that I can sound like you? And it made me really uncomfortable, because she was posing this question to me in perfectly intelligible English. I couldn't find anything wrong from a sort of communication perspective, but she clearly had this complex, this hang up about her English, and it made me sad. And I was like, well, why is my English so much better than yours? And it just, yeah, from there, and after sort of encountering these different scenarios and having these sort of different aha moments, if you will, I did enroll in a graduate program where the lead researcher and the sort of coordinator of the program was a global Englishes scholar. It's actually Heath Rose, who's kind of a big deal in global Englishes. So he was the lead researcher, the coordinator of the program. And on that 2-year journey of getting my master's degree, that's when I really started to dig into this topic in a bigger way.
I would like to tap into your knowledge of his expertise, because a lot of these questions that I have come from, you were awakened to this idea by your experiences, and I was awakened to this idea by listening to you. So you've got a lot more to say about this and I have a lot more questions than I am willing to admit. But who is the larger roadblock to this? The attitude of the teachers, you think, or the attitude of the students?
Really good question. And there's a lot of research that's being done on student attitudes, and a lot less research being done on teacher attitudes. And actually, my master's dissertation was focusing on teacher attitudes rather than student attitudes. And what I found, and what the other literature suggests, is that English teachers, tend to be really receptive to this idea of global Englishes, because they see, looking around in the real world, these interactions happening with people from different linguocultural backgrounds using English as a common language. They know this reality, and they know that like this is good and we should probably be teaching this in the classroom. But they also feel very frustrated because there are a lot of sort of entrenched barriers to introducing these ideas into the classroom. Standardized testing is a huge one, and we can talk more about that if you'd like.
Oh, if we have to. Oh, okay.
Oh, I mean, we don't have to. I
No, no,
think
no.
everybody.
I'm being facetious. I'm sorry. Of
No,
course we
no,
have
no,
to,
no,
but
no.
like, I just hate every. Sorry, I don't want to go on my own rant. Like, keep
Yeah,
on with your
no,
rant. Go ahead. Yeah.
totally agree. Yeah, ugh, it's the worst. But standardized testing is a huge barrier. And then, yeah, just there are other barriers, societal barriers, other more widespread prejudices towards certain varieties of English, which are then reflected in hiring practices at
Mm.
schools. You know, I am fully aware that I am talking about global Englishes as a white woman from America, and my English is the standard English that is taught in many of our textbooks. And so it's all well and good if I'm talking about this, but until there's more diversity in the instructors and the actual people who pass on English knowledge to English users and learners, that nothing really big is going to change. So those sort of entrenched barriers, I think, are bigger than perhaps barriers that teachers individually hold, and also that barriers that students hold. I feel
Okay.
in the research that I've read, when, for example, a non-native speaker is the teacher in an English class, and then that teacher does a small research study asking, oh, were you aware that I was not a native speaker, and did that matter to you? And do you, how do you feel about learning from a non-native speaker? Generally speaking, students will be like, yeah, it was totally fine. In fact, I actually appreciated that you were someone who also learned English after acquiring your first language. You've been where I was. And so students tend not to care once they're in that situation, but perhaps before they enter that situation, they'd be like, well, I really do want to learn from a native speaker because I want to speak like, the person on TV, or the person in my textbook, or the person that I see on that poster who looks like an American, whatever.
I'm Canadian, and I come from a background having been born in the Philippines and then immigrated to Canada when I was 9 years old. And then living on the West Coast in Vancouver, which is famously multicultural. Not quite as multilingual as it should be, but there are a number of cultures. And of course, in different households, there are different languages being spoken. And as a result, there's all kinds of different inflections of English, different types of English brought over. There's a South Indian English. There's a English from African countries, English spoken more so now than it was when I was there, from Latin American countries, but especially from Asian countries, especially from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China, was a sort of accented English that I would hear. And I think as a benefit of growing up in that environment, it was just something that I lived with. There were all kinds of people that spoke with accents. And I think if I may, I don't know if I'm, cutting off the conversation too quickly, but I think one of the things that we need to be able to tell our students is there is a huge difference between speaking English with an accent and speaking English well. There are people who speak English fluently and speak English with an accent, and are themselves actually really good conveyors of the knowledge that you need to pick up the language, without needing to sound like perfectly somebody from New Jersey or from, Little Rock. The fact that you sound like somebody from Little Rock is not a sign that you're actually going to be able to teach the language well, nor is it even a sign that you know the language well. Not any prejudice to anybody from Arkansas. I could be talking about people from Regina, or I could be talking to people from, I don't know, Suffolk. But that knowledge? I mean, in your estimation, is that the sort of thing that we need to get as part of the message to people? It's not just the intonation and the pronunciation of certain words. It's okay to make mistakes, which almost never works. I say that to my students all the time, and they still don't get it. But
Yeah.
what sort of vector of approach should we have to start getting students? As a normal teacher, what would you say to a normal teacher? This is how you first approach the idea that students have to get over their over idealization of American English.
Yeah, I think that, it's important to say in very plain terms that, accent and the way that you form your words doesn't matter so much, as long as it is intelligible to the person that you're speaking to or the audience that you're speaking to. But I think what's even more effective, perhaps, is to show students different video clips, or if you don't have, everybody has YouTube. So different video clips, I think, is the most effective, because you can see and hear. And I think the visual and the auditory input, I think, makes a bigger impression than just the sound. But anyway, you show different users of English speaking in different ways. And you're talking about accent, which I think is also important. But, for example, if I were to show a clip, I'm trying to think of a good example now, and my brain is blanking. There's somebody
of what?
of a Japanese, of a highly proficient Japanese user of English, but somebody who is very clearly speaking what I would call Japanese English, where not only there is an accent, but perhaps the words are manipulated in a way that some people might consider slightly unnatural, but is completely understandable. Maybe, mixing up singular and plural occasionally. I don't even, using the word mixing up is maybe not even the best way to say.
I would like to introduce most of the people that I meet in the street, or not in the street, in the teachers' lounge at a few of the universities that I teach at. They're perfectly understandable. They make a couple of pronunciation. I don't even know if at this point I should call them errors.
Yeah.
Something that they've been doing for a while, and in the same sense that what's a famous French accent? The French famously, stereotypically, and almost prejudicially, are known for not being able to say th, the th
Sure.
sound, and instead they replace it with a z sound. Or famously, Koreans can't say, what is it? They can't say the z sound, and they replace it with the j sound. Those things are found in the accents of these Japanese speakers that I know, and of course the whole LR thing. But the important thing is that because they're fluent, the context is clearly there, and you can understand quite clearly. If you can't say jewelry, not a big deal, because if you go, I went to Saks Fifth Avenue and I was incredibly tempted to pull off a jewelry robbery. The word is jewelry, right?
Of course.
You're thinking more about the fact that I didn't know you were thinking about jewelry robberies, but that is something that's clearly in the context. And without that fluency, without that context, and with all this focus just on individual words, okay, class, today we're going to practice refrigerator. No, that's not the right pronunciation. That's where I think a lot of the complexes, the anxiety that students have, is because they're pounded on individual words and individual pronunciation, and not asked to actually say full sentences. No, they have to have pronunciation of words before they get to sentences.
Yeah. And to your point, it's more than just individual words, it's context. And context is not only, spoken language, but it's also body language. It's also nonverbal cues. And I think something that's really important in intercultural communication are these, communicative strategies that are so often not taught in our classrooms. And I'll be honest, in the sort of standard syllabus that I'm asked to teach at my university, there's not a lot of time
Okay, I
to
want to talk
teach
about that too. Yeah.
communicative strategies such as, when you're in a group setting, the sort of things that you see in real world conversation. When you're in a group setting and somebody is struggling for a word, somebody else comes in and offers, maybe this is what you're thinking of, maybe this is the word you want, and then yes, or no, that's not what I mean, or paraphrasing so that everybody understands what everyone is saying. And these group strategies as well as individual strategies, asking for clarification. If you know that somebody else in the group speaks Japanese, nani nani wa eigo de nan to iimasu ka? Like asking, like, what is that in English? And then having somebody come to your assistance and using not only English, but your other languages as a way to get your meaning across. These are the things that are really, really critical when you're having conversations with a diverse group of people. And these are unfortunately things that often get overlooked when we're creating syllabi and curricula.
I really do want to talk about that. At the same time, I want to acknowledge there are probably a bunch of people that want to speak to you. There's already a comment in Facebook, and it's from Chuki.
Absolutely.
Hi, Chuki.
Yeah.
So she says there are 378 million native speakers, those who speak English as their first language, and 743 million non-native speakers, those who speak English as their second language in the world. And I think her point is, and I completely agree with it, that what is this focus on all of these people that have a particular accent that comes from North America, Oceania, well, not even Oceania, Australia and New Zealand, and Canada and England. What is that? I mean, okay, it's English, and technically they speak English as a first language. Why? Most people don't speak it that way. But before we get on to that, so thank you, Chuki, for your comment. Other people who would like to comment via Facebook, please feel free to do so. People in the room, why don't you, open up your cameras, and I will now allow you to unmute yourselves if you do, but it would be kind of you if you could actually use the raise hand function in the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window, so then I know who's next in terms of who's going to be asking questions of Kelly. So I invite everyone here, turn on your cameras and maybe join us in the conversation. So back to that point about syllabi. Have you tried speaking to, you must teach part-time at another university, and then there's your full-time university. Have you tried bringing this in terms of like a more sort of concerted effort in the school, or when you speak to other teachers and they're talking about, well, how do I get this into my school, not just on an ad hoc basis, me in the classroom talking about this one video, but to get the school to acknowledge it and to get the curriculum to acknowledge it. How would one go about doing that? What are these roadblocks that they can expect, and what would you do to sort of get over them?
Yeah, that's tricky. At my previous school, where I was teaching for about 8 years, I was finally in a position in my last few years to be able to make recommendations when we were creating syllabi for new classes and creating curricula for new programs. And I did try to choose teaching materials that had more of a global Englishes focus or even vibe. Sometimes it is still quite difficult to find textbooks that really integrate this idea of global Englishes well. So often you will find textbooks that claim to be very global in their focus, but really it's just like every other chapter they introduce a country, a food, and a festival, and like that's their intercultural. That's the extent to which they go. They'll introduce some knowledge about a different country, and that's about it. So it is tricky sometimes when you're choosing teaching materials with an eye to create a more global Englishes focused syllabus or curriculum even. So often I have to bring in supplementary materials I use a lot of YouTube. I did at the JALT, Kyoto JALT presentation, I introduced a bunch of resources, which I would be happy to
I
share.
was about to say, and when you allow, as you're bringing up those resources on your computer,
Yeah, hold on one moment.
sure. What kind of attack do you use, like in terms of, sort of the, I don't want to say vapid, but relatively shallow thing about festivals and foods and sports,
Yeah,
which I think always tends to leave students with the idea in their minds that, oh, okay, well, that's you talking about your culture. So I'm going to talk about sumo and cup noodle and sushi as a
yeah,
Japanese person. And oh, the world is going to get along super. Oh, and by the way, my pronunciation sucks. And, they're kind of still left with the same ideas that they had before that they walk into the classroom with. So when
sure.
you're bringing in your supplementary materials, what are you aiming for in terms of the pair work that you do, the group work that you do? What kind of questions do you send them into the breakout rooms with, or their groups with?
Yeah, I think that obviously showing and that's it. It's better than nothing.
Okay.
But but obviously it's much better if you are able to, for example, show clips of diverse users speaking English, and then having students get into small groups or pairs and have them think a little bit more critically about what they just saw. And now, depending on their level, you might have students do this in their native language, because they might not be able to articulate their thoughts so clearly in English. Obviously, if you're working with more advanced students, you may ask them to do a sort of reflection activity in English. But I think that it's a lot to ask very low, sort of TOEIC 300 level students to then reflect on this video of different people speaking different Englishes. So you would have them do it in their native language, which for many of us, I would assume is Japanese. And then, yeah, doing activities like that where you're encouraging reflection and you're encouraging students to engage directly with these ideas, I think that is definitely more effective than simply, using a couple of different clips throughout your classes throughout the year. Um, Something that I came across that I haven't been able to try yet, but I'm hoping to do maybe this coming year, in this coming semester, is a project where students are asked to research a specific variety of Englishes. That could be a nationally bound variety, like Jamaican English,
Mm.
but it could also be like a community English or even a regional English. However, most students tend to choose a nationally bound English because it's a little bit easier for them to understand. And then each student is supposed to present their findings to other students. And the students are to listen and to ask questions and then to reflect. And by doing that, the idea is to create a greater awareness of the diversity of Englishes around the world, but also to realize that, uh, you know, perhaps Japanese English or this, English that I might think that the learner might think of as like an in-between, sort of incomplete, in progress English, is not necessarily the case. That, my English can be communicative, and yeah, just sort of creating that greater awareness through projects like that and through reflection.
Do you see any harm in for example, like me, my Japanese is probably around somewhere between, it's hard to judge, a B2 and a C1 Japanese.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that allows me to actually teach in Japanese. I
Hmm.
really do teach in Japanese for a lot of my classes when I feel that it's just faster and more efficient for me to get my instructions out for what is actually a fairly unique classroom, and to get ideas across that involve their own, as you were saying, their own reflection on things that are difficult for them to actually even consider in English, and their brain power is spent thinking about English as opposed to deeper critical thinking on a particular topic.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've noticed about the luxury being able to teach in Japanese is that when you get to topics like this, then they not only can listen to you, and you can you can instruct them in a way that gets their critical thinking going, but you provide an example for a lot of these students. For some of them, you know, in the universities where I teach, this is the first time encountering a supposed native speaker. Don't really like that term, actually, and I wanted to ask you what there was an alternative to.
Yeah.
A supposed native speaker who can actually speak Japanese, and then would do so in front of them in a language learning setting. And one of the luxuries of it is that I tell them, well, you see how you can understand me? You see how my Japanese just sucks? And it's just horrible, and it's sometimes painful to listen to, because you've got to struggle to actually understand me sometimes because I'm choosing the wrong word, or I don't have the right pronunciation. Well, that's how you'll sound in English on a good day. If you keep studying for the next 10 years anyway, you're going to maybe sound like me. And that's okay, because that's how most second language learners of the language sound. And if you can't accept that, if you're still struggling with the idea that first I want to be perfect in my pronunciation before I start actually letting words come out of my mouth, you're not going to get anywhere in this language. But my question is, do you see any harm in actually providing sort of instruction in their first language? So providing instruction in L1 in an EFL setting. So no, you're shaking your head no?
No, not at all. I actually think it's really, really helpful in many situations. You know, the situation that you're talking about, where your Japanese isn't quote unquote perfect, it's not native speaker level, but it's intelligible. And yes, you make mistakes. And maybe that was a weird word for you to use, but like, I got what you were trying to say. And sort of modeling that, and modeling somebody who is learning a language, who isn't speaking perfectly, but is speaking and is understandable. I think that's really important, to show that you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be understood. So as a model, you can show that to your students, and that's great. But also, you know, if you're working with lower level students and you're trying to get these sort of headier ideas across to them, again, it just might not work so well if you're just using exclusively English. And one of the things that Global English is language teaching, which is this sort of framework for research and teaching that comes from this Global English's paradigm. One of the things that Global English's language teaching emphasizes is the importance of using multilingual resources and translanguaging. It acknowledges that code switching and these sorts of strategies where you're incorporating different languages in the classroom can be super useful. Not only that, it's really realistic, because again, when you're in the real world, unless the other person or the other people are all native speakers of English and they have no other linguistic resources available to them, which could be the case for your students, depending on who they are and what their goals are and what they're going to go and do. If they're all going to go and work in New York, that could very well be the case, but also not, because New York is super multicultural. But anyway, you know, I forgot what I was saying.
We were just talking about the usefulness of using translanguaging in the classroom.
So important. I think that this idea of, you know, immersion in English only isn't necessarily the way. I think that there are situations and cases in which an immersion approach might be worthwhile, but I find that certainly for my students at Tokyo Kasei, that is like never the case.
The whole immersion thing, stop me if I go beyond like 2 minutes on this, but the whole immersion thing came out of the, you know, late 60s, early 70s, when the first few English again, quotation marks, native speakers came to Japan. And of course, they had no idea how to speak Japanese. And immersion was starting to take off as a new sort of technique, pioneered in Canada, apparently. Didn't know that. Yeah, pioneered in Canada to teach, in both directions, French to English speakers and English to French speakers. But that was literally an immersion situation. And we have here EFL. And yes, there were mini camps that you could do, and you could put everyone in a mountain lodge for a week of supposedly English only, but it's still not immersion because you don't have the need to go home after classes and then go shopping and then read all of the signs in English. And immersion is a completely separate thing. And
not
what
only
we
that,
were doing.
Oh, sorry.
No, go.
I was just going to say, not only that, but I feel like immersion works best when the students themselves are relatively diverse, where English really is the only common language that you have. Exactly. But that's not the case for us. Everybody speaks Japanese. And of course, they're going to default to Japanese when they're talking amongst themselves outside of the classroom or whatever. Like, it's unreasonable to expect them to do otherwise, unless they're highly motivated and they're going to work in like an all English environment, which is just truly not the case for the majority of the students that I work with, and probably you work with, and probably we work with.
Yes. Well, again, another huge topic, but just to finish my point, I think so back in the late 60s, early 70s, the whole idea of English only as, in the classroom to make students really perk up their ears and then force them to speak to the gaijin was a rationalization, a justification for the fact that these teachers couldn't speak Japanese in the classroom. And they said, oh, no, this will be good for them. No, that's a rationalization. This won't be good for them. And to hammer home my point, just think about any university in Canada or in Australia that requires a Russian teacher or that requires an Arabic teacher for a third language option, okay? Would you hire an Arabic or a Russian teacher for a university in Australia, university in Canada, who could not speak to the administration, who could not speak to the office staff, who could not speak to the students in L1? If you were going to get an Arabic teacher, is it something that you want to say, okay, let's hire a guy who can't speak anything but Arabic, and let's transplant him in Australia, and then that'll be really good for the students? That's just not. It's not thinkable, but somehow it's the norm in Japan. And when I realized that, I actually use that as motivation to go against the grain and further my Japanese language learning. Okay, before we go on, hey, I'm just warning you guys here in the Zoom room, there are only 20 minutes. And if you want to get your question into the expert here, Kelly Cargos, time for you to turn on your camera or to ask your questions, or at least raise your hands using the reactions button. For the people who are watching us on Facebook right now, please drop in your comments, drop in your questions in there. And let's see. Oh, and we have someone else here who is obviously on an iPhone. Don't really know who it is, but Vladimira, Linda, Renee, please feel free to join us, turning on your camera and opening your mic. So, native speaker, I hate that term. What are the alternatives?
Ooh, this is a
here we go.
Difficult question, because what are the other alternatives? I mean, I think it's really hard to talk about this particular topic without using the term native speaker, even if it's in quotations, because it is so widely used, and it's so clearly so widely used here in Japan. You see so many job advertisements still that are looking for native speakers. And so, like, I think that you have to acknowledge that this is a term that is still, fraught in our industry. So I can't say, like, do away with it entirely, because I think, in order to interrogate this issue, you need to,
but
bring in the term.
Do you think that if we could do away with it entirely, things would be better?
I mean, I think so, definitely.
Okay, good. We agree.
I would argue that it's much, much better to use terms like proficient user, expert user, these labels that sort of designate level of proficiency, like beginner user. Even I don't really like the word beginner. I don't know. It's difficult. It is really challenging to think of what terms would be better, and that wouldn't connote like a a sort of hierarchy, because you could argue that once you
That's the
start using terms like expert user, well,
yeah, yeah.
obviously expert user equals native speaker, and then you're just sort of trading one term for the other.
Yes,
But
yes, yes.
the beauty of a term like expert user would be that, anybody could be, in an ideal situation, anybody could be an expert user. An expert user is somebody that can use the language to communicate ideas without any real problem, is the way that I would define it. But then, we all have to agree collectively on a definition. And native speaker is convenient because, native speaker equals somebody who has it as their first language. But even that is tricky, because what does first language mean? What if you grew up bilingual? Like, it's so
When
tricky.
after I spoke to you in November, I started thinking about this topic because I knew that I eventually would have to start thinking about this topic to get ready to talk to you. And
Sure.
one of the things that I did was I posted a poll in
Mm.
OTJ Off Topic that asked, okay, well, if we can all start thinking about the term native speaker, first of all, the question was asking, I got to paraphrase it because I couldn't find it just now in
Oh
Off
yeah.
Topic. It was a few months ago. Basically, the idea was that if you think that native speaker is something that we should discuss as the collective term to refer to all of us from this giant salad bowl of countries that come together to teach English here, what would you replace it with? And I threw out some options like expert user, a whole bunch of stuff that even to me were about as unattractive as native speaker. And what was interesting was that eventually, if I'm not mistaken, native speaker stood a second ranking after the end of the
Huh.
poll. That most
Mm.
people said, no, there's nothing wrong with native speaker. What are you talking about? No, why are you opening a can of worms when we don't need to? And other people were going with, my personal thing was expert user, but there was another option. I wish I could find it. I'll try to link to it later in the YouTube recording of this. Basically, I was surprised that native speaker was something that people liked a lot. Now, just if I just may, indulge me for one more minute, I think the problem with, as you said, creating these hierarchies, expert user, intermediate user, beginner user, but this is your teacher,
Yeah.
to me is problematic. My overall suggestion was that we just do away with it.
Mm.
Either hire people that you know are effective in teaching the language or teaching that course, or do not. We
Mm.
are teachers. We are English teachers. I have never heard of the idea when you're studying French that, oh, by the way, your teacher is a native speaker of French, or they're not. At the University of Toronto, hired people that they knew could teach the language and could teach the material, and even the students, because the university didn't keep banging on this point about, oh, you've got a native speaker for a teacher, oh, you don't, but that's okay, this is grammar, and all of these qualifications. No, you had an English teacher, you had a French teacher, you had a Japanese teacher, and their ability to teach does not hinge on anything but their familiarity with the material and their relative fluency in the language. They've achieved the level of fluency, and it's way better than yours, and they can mentor you at least up to their level, which is years away for you in terms of achieving. And I think that's where we should end up. It's not
Yeah.
the idea of like, well, Jose is better than Kelly, but Kelly's way better in terms of linguistics, and so, choose what you want. No, we're both English teachers. We were hired by the administration, and that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I agree with your point that on a job listing or with that should be totally done away with. I think it'll be hard at this point, like realistically speaking, to just be like, native speaker, we're not using that word anymore. It's done. Because I think so many people still have this idea sort of burned into their brain. But I do agree that if there was a way to just talk about users of English without invoking a hierarchical ranking system, I mean, that would be great. But I feel again that might be slightly idealistic.
I noticed though that quite a few chapters in JALT. I don't know if it's become policy at the national level, but I can certainly say OTJ has a policy that if you are to speak about hiring, or this school needs a new teacher, go talk to my buddy there. And so we're passing around information about job openings, that you are not to use that term, or you are not to hire discriminately
Yeah,
based on the idea of native speakerism.
that's wonderful.
Yeah, so at least OTJ does that. I've seen that as a point being made often by Jackson Lee and others who work with him and feel the same way.
Yeah,
Oh, I just noticed we have a couple of new comments in
great.
Facebook. Okay, so here we go. There's a link there by, who is that? By Chiyuki. Hi, Chiyuki. By Chiyuki again on Is English a Form of Linguistic? I don't see the title, but there's a good link in there. Alex Burke notes, the goal would be that they can see there is no one perfect language goal, but all the speakers have commonalities such as total syllables. She was here earlier, but I guess she had to split. Now, I would have liked her to elaborate on that, but Chiyuki comes in again. English as a form of linguistic imperialism is over or should be ended? Well, totally, hardly agree. Timothy Ang says, has anyone done a study on native speaker requirement popping up on JREC JACET? Seen anything on as data on that, Kelly?
I haven't, but I would be curious because I do still see on JREC postings from universities asking for, native speaker teachers. And I thought, we were so done with that, but I guess in some places, no, that's still happening. So yeah, I haven't seen any specific research. Maybe that could be your research.
You know what? It might not be my research, although I should probably. No, I got other things. No, it's not important, but there's so many other sort of piles of paper on my desk right now. But I spoke to you at the conference, which was, when was the conference this, or 21? That was early November.
Yeah, November 15th or something.
Okay, it was mid-November. In early November, I believe it was early November. It was before I spoke to you. I did a keynote speech for the ALTs of Nagasaki. And the year before that, I did a keynote speech for Fukuoka. And now this year, I'll be doing the keynote speech for the ALTs of Fukui. And it's unfortunate that I did not speak to the Nagasaki ALTs after I spoke to you, because I think still ALTs are hired by a lot of dispatch companies that still go on about native speakerism. And like I try to spread the word about, diversity accommodation, neurodiversity accommodation to the ALTs while I'm talking to them about the other things that I'm talking about them. I would like to point out that if you see the use of the word native speakerism in your own sort of, as Charlie Brown said a few weeks ago, your own maybe safely subversive way, start to work that out of the conversation, or bring that in at the high school or junior high school level. That is something that would be a goal. But Alex says, Jose, go up the chat, please. I don't really know what that means, but okay. If we're not going to use native speakerism, do you actually see like an end to that? Like you're saying that it's not something that we should bundle up and easily throw away, but
well, I mean, I would love to, but it's just it's challenging, especially in a place like Japan. And I'll throw out that in certain countries, I think it is Taiwan, China, and South Korea, and perhaps Indonesia, although I'm like not positive about that, but definitely Taiwan and China. You cannot get a visa for teaching English. Like you cannot get an English teaching job at like the equivalent of an eikaiwa or some kind of language school in these countries if you do not come from a country that is associated with the inner circle, that is associated with native speakers. So actually, that same colleague that I was talking about at the top of the show, he ended up leaving the job that we both left. And he is now living in Taiwan. And yeah, he wanted to teach English at a language school and was told that, oh, that's not going to be possible because you're Japanese. And when you have this native speakerism baked into law. I mean, that's tough, man. That's tough. And I think that Asia is particularly tough in that respect. I think that, it's something that from the bottom up, people can really start to push back against. But, there's it's tough. But I think that what we can do as individuals working at our institutions is, if we have the power to do so, we can really push for more diverse hiring. If you happen to be involved in like the resume screening process and whatever, you can really try and recommend candidates who might have been overlooked 20 years ago, but who are immensely qualified for the position. And the only thing that might not fully recommend them is the fact that they're not American or whatever. You can exercise what power that you do have in your own bubble, your own safely subversive way, as you've mentioned earlier. You can try to push back against that. And then in your own classroom, just sort of doing what you can to push against the idea of this hierarchy in English users.
I want to point out that Chiyuki, hi Chiyuki, put in a little link at the bottom of the Facebook comments, and it looks really good. I'm gonna check that out. And we already have a couple of comments, 3 comments actually, from the audience in the room. I don't know why you guys aren't turning on. If you're not able to turn on your cameras, please tell me and I'll check that out. But I'm pretty sure you can. Don't know why you're not. But if you're just being shy this morning, look, I came in here with these huge pieces of luggage under my eyes. So if I can do that, you can do that too. Oh, but first of all, I should ask you, are you, oh, here we go. Vladimira, nice to meet you. Vladimira, did you want to open up your microphone and mention your comment here live? Oh, no. There she goes. Bye.
Sorry.
Wrong button. Well, okay. When you come back, turn on your camera and your mic, and maybe you can bring in your, oh, there she goes. Okay, very good.
There's a little human next to me, and my voice is slightly compromised today, so I'm not sure if I'm speaking today. No, that was just a very brief comment. As far as I know, well, South Korea does not hire non-native speaking teachers either. What else? Yep, I just wanted to kind of give you a bit of a sum up to the comment related to the, well, basically we should not be labeling our teachers. I mean,
Vladimira, may I?
We are a generation away from it, maybe, but well, we need to start somewhere. So I believe we should be little by little we should just describe our teachers as, passionate, qualified, maybe, just
qualified. Yeah, why don't we just go with qualified?
Just go with teachers. Like if you're not qualified, you shouldn't be a teacher.
Yeah.
And like you love your job, you do it well, and you happen to have a decent qualification for it. That's great. On top of it, and that should do. And let them allow people to prove.
Vladimira, I hear a bit of an accent in your voice, and it's lovely. Have you had any personal experiences that you can recount that are relative to what we're talking about here, about the prejudice against people who speak with different accents, or you being not traditionally a native speaker as it is defined?
Yeah. I'm not a native speaker, of course not. Right. I mean, of course. Well, the word my name may suggest that, well, there's nothing Anglo-Saxon about my name. I come from a country which doesn't exist anymore. I was born in Czechoslovakia, but I've been living kind of all over Europe, and now for the past 3 years I've been living in Japan.
How have you faced things here then, or what do you face here? Is there anything you might?
Well, so far maybe I have been blessed, so I haven't been really experiencing too much. Bad. Yeah, that's my daughter.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Okay.
It's really cute.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I think. Did you want to give me your story?
Where was I?
You've been in Japan 3 years.
For 3 years, yeah. I don't think maybe I might have been really quite lucky so far. So I haven't had any major issues, but finding a job which I would love. But I understand that I'm not always, I've met people who struggled. I very vividly remember a very passionate, I believe a great teacher who was from Singapore, and well, absolutely fluent, more fluent than me probably. And he just kept looking for a job for about 3 months and had to leave back home because he just didn't find any. He didn't have the right background.
Conversely, I still see people who I never hear from them after they post something on certain bulletin boards and so, but they'll tell a story where like, hi, my girlfriend and I are done traveling across Australia in our camper van, and we thought we'd give living in Japan a try. Neither of us have any university degrees, but we heard we could get jobs in Japan teaching English. And I'm just looking at that and going, they're probably right. They probably could. And your friend in Singapore or whomever else is having the problems that they have, but a couple of people who just wanted to come to Japan on a lark. Not that they're, I don't know anything about their English teaching ability, but that gets hired above somebody who has a linguistics degree, but they just happen to come from Singapore.
Yes. I mean, I gave my full disclosure at the top of the show, but I definitely got my job because I'm relatively well spoken and I'm a native speaker. Like I think that in terms of the teaching experience that I had and the qualifications that I had in another country, I could not have gotten the job that I got initially. And then, I love this job and I'm really passionate about it. And I got further qualifications later after the fact. But
yes,
I definitely benefited from that. And that makes me feel really uncomfortable. And it's something that, I acknowledge. And now I would like to sort of work to maybe
heads up on. Okay.
Yeah, make it, I don't know, make it more.
We have a couple of comments. Sorry, Kelly, to interrupt.
Yeah.
We have a couple of comments from Bronwyn and Linda, and I'm giving you one last chance to turn on your camera. No? Okay, then I'm going to read them out so we don't walk away from the episode without actually having acknowledged them. Bronwyn says...
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do have like a little bit more time if we'd like to go a little over time.
Okay, so I'll just read these out and then I'll leave it up to you in terms of the timing. Bronwyn says, I now see job ads with requirements native level English, she says, which many people read as code for native speakers preferred. That's true. That's kind of like, we don't want people who, or we want people who aren't Black is like code switched around, like where the negative is in terms of like being discriminatory and racist. Yeah, kind of something like that. Linda Kadota says, native speaker Japanese Americans have sometimes had similar trouble with people not considering them qualified to teach real English.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I have a similar sort of story to tell, because when you look at me walking down the street, I think it makes life easier here in rural Japan because people don't stare at you as, some white guy walking down the street. But when it comes to walking into a classroom, and not so much with my university kids. My university kids are usually cool with it as soon as I explain myself. But with older salarymen working in companies, when I was still working sometimes for English conversation schools, you would get a few raised eyebrows. And one guy that I met, who turned out to be one of my better students and really good guy, he said, when he first saw me walk in the door, he said to me, oh, I was so relieved when I heard you speak. And I said, why? Well, because I could tell that, you really are a native speaker. I said, yeah, I really am. That's what it said on the paper. He said, yeah, I thought you were somebody from Sri Lanka or something. And hi, Vladimir, thank you. And I thought, what? But, I didn't want to, ruin the air of the class, but I thought, well, that's kind of racist, isn't it? But you realize that there is a lot of, maybe racist is too hard a word, entrenched, unacknowledged prejudice, skin color and eye shape, maybe.
I don't know. I think that in certain cases, racism is not too strong a word. I do think that when we're talking about global Englishes, there is prejudice toward certain varieties of English. And I do think that in some cases, that prejudice is stemming from or certainly intermingled with a racist outlook. In the research that I did for my dissertation, I spoke with a participant who was teaching, but also working for an app, basically, that not Duolingo, but something similar to Duolingo, where it was a language learning app. And she was in a position of relative authority, and she was able to spearhead a drive to include lots of different types of English audio samples, so that people learning English would be exposed to different kinds of Englishes. And the app received a review, a negative review, where someone was like, "This app expects us to learn English from Indians," and like was really like all caps sort of thing. Like it was horrifying.
The person writing that comment, could you identify to any degree where they may be from, or was it just like a really anonymous name?
I also I heard this like a second account, so I did not I do not know.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, when you hear stuff like that, that is pretty unequivocally racist.
Yeah.
And so there is definitely huge prejudices that uplift this native speakerism and keep global Englishes from spreading and becoming the norm in English teaching, for sure, 100%. And then
go.
I was just going to say, going back to, I believe it was Bronwyn. Yeah, Bronwyn's comment. This idea of native level English, again, it assumes that the goal of learning English is to achieve native proficiency. And I think one of the really lovely things about global English as language teaching is the acknowledgement that, well, no, A, that's an unrealistic goal for most language learners. And B, that is not the goal of most language. Well, I mean, I would argue that that is not what most language learners are aspiring to do. Maybe they think that that's what they should be aspiring to do. But in fact, most of the students that I teach, for example, they want to use English to make new friends. They want to use English to watch Netflix, maybe with or without subtitles. Like they want to use English maybe to communicate with some people that they're going to interact with in their future jobs. But that's going to be, in interactions that are 15 minutes long, maybe. And they're not looking to get to whatever a native level. And I think that posting that as the end goal and requiring that almost implicitly or explicitly is kind of BS. And I think that we need to move away from that. I see that there are other comments and questions, so I'm going to stop talking.
No. You believe it or not, Kelly, we're here to hear you talk.
Wow.
But let's see. Bronwyn points out that I'm Australian. Lots of my American colleagues over the years have said I'm not a native speaker.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah,
that's funny, but that's also sad. But
yeah, well,
I believe it.
I can understand that. I facetiously joke about the fact that Americans can't spell, but that doesn't mean that like I'm being imperialistic about my Commonwealth spellings. It's just that it's supposed to be a joke, but I wouldn't point that out to my students or use that as any kind of a thing, especially when hey, you're Australian. Hey, why? How come you have the same job as me? You're not a native speaker. It's just a psychopathic. Interesting point here, and I want to discuss this with you, Kelly. And Alex was talking about a project that she wants to pursue, where there are set sentences. Like I was on Saks Fifth Avenue and is thinking about pulling off a jewelry robbery or something like that. One sentence. You say it, I say it. My good friend who was born in Jamaica, Lisa Hunsberger, would say it. Alex or Bronwyn from Australia would say it. And we have these, or your Singaporean friend, Jackson from Taiwan would say it. And we have these different types of people saying these individual sentences and make up a data bank of these sentences. So I want to say to Alex, I would like to talk to you about that project. That sounds really interesting. And that's where we can really put the power of OTJ to good use. We actually have a hand raised. And Kumi, would you like to turn on your camera and your microphone, and or at least your microphone? And there you are. Hi, Kumi. And ask the question directly to Kelly. Kelly, this is Kumi. Kumi, this is Kelly.
You have lovely curtains. Hey. Hello.
I'm sorry. What a mess. Okay. Anyway.
No.
Okay. So yeah, it's really interesting point that, like, you know, non-native speakers, but like, you know, proficient English users should be qualified, you know, to teach English. Yes, I totally agree with you. But I'm the one who benefited with you know, is it clear? But like JET programs, you know, JET programs, like, you know, doesn't require any teaching experiences. However, they require those people, like, even I had an ALT from Zimbabwe, but ooh. Yeah, I still remember like talking to her all the time, but she was of course, like, you know, speaking in English, and her English was fluent. And I didn't care, like, you know, her accent. I think she grew up in America, though. That's the thing. But, you know, it was really interesting that she was talking about Zimbabwe. I really loved that. But at the same time, I was really interested in American culture, because that's the only thing, because we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Netflix, but only thing I could watch is, like, you know, Full House on NHK, you know, Beverly Hills 90210 or NHK. And I wanted to ask her about it. So I think, you know, yeah, like, you know, JET program's main purpose or main goal is to bring foreign cultures to Japan, show the rural area Japanese kids what is, like, you know, English speaking cultures are, right? So I was really interested in it, and she could answer my questions, and she, you know, gave me some stimulus, like, on, okay, this is interesting, I want to do more. So I really think, like, bring cultural aspect is important thing. But the thing is, now 2022, kids don't need it. But kids in Fukui, back in Fukui, they still need it. Actually, a lot of my students, like, back in Fukui, they don't have computers for their own. They only have like, you know, small smartphones, and you can do a lot of things with smartphones. But a lot of time, if you're Japanese kids watching like other Japanese contents, then YouTube don't push only push Japanese contents. So, like, by algorithm, actually, it seems like we're able to, like, you know, get more influenced by other cultures, but actually you don't. So maybe, like, you know, I benefited by, like, just bringing culture. I mean, you know, yeah, but she was really, she was always friendly. She was talkative, and she always answered my questions. She shared her, my ALD, she shared her culture. That was, like, you know, important thing to me. So, yeah. And also, like, you know, how, like, I became fluent because I loved American TV shows. And also, like, you know, Jose, actually, like, you know, we talk often, right? And then, like, I don't know how to say it. My fluency came from, like, more like a familiarity to the culture. And a lot of English media is produced by native speakers. So you need to be familiar with the culture and, like, what's going on, what's popular, and how people speak, what's the jokes. If you don't know these things, actually, I don't want to say entertainment factor, but, like, you know, like, your teaching will not gonna be fun. So actually, like, even you're really, like, you know, established English teacher or, like, you know, linguistic professional, a lot of Japanese kids don't
care.
Mm.
I'm talking about kids. I don't know about Eikaiwa. Eikaiwa is like Wild Wild West. If you're a native speaker and if you have like, blonde hair, blue eyes, you're qualified. I'm sorry, my Mr. Mouse. Okay, anyways. So I don't know, like, we cannot regulate Eikaiwa because it's like, it's just public company, right? But like, at least like, for junior high school, JET program, for me, it's been a good experience. So I don't know. Okay, anyways.
I'm not a native speaker of cat, but I believe my knowledge of cat tells me that your cat is saying, why are you talking to them and you are not paying enough attention to me?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what
because
Mr.
you're
Meow
fluent in cat because you had cat.
I could be fluent in cat, but I'm not a native speaker of cat. But
you're not a native speaker.
No,
Yes.
I'm not. Kelly, how are you doing for time? It is now 11:15, and you've graced us with your presence here for over an hour.
Let's go till 11:30, and then I will have to sign off.
That would be lovely. Thank you very much, Kumi, for your point. CA, did you want to come in and bring in your points yourself? You, I think, pointed out that you agreed heavily with Kelly on the idea that there's an underlying racism to things. There's a healthy discussion going on now in Facebook.
Before we do that, can I just address what Kumi said just really quickly?
Yes.
I think that what you said is really interesting because I do think that for many of my students, one of the reasons why they are motivated to learn English is to interact with what they consider to be English culture, which very often means American culture. And that's great. I'm American. I love Full House. American TV is fantastic. And I think that it's wonderful to encourage students to interact with different kinds of media in English, because I do think that for many people, integrating or learning a culture is one of the main motivations for continued English learning. And if they have strong internal motivation, like, oh, I want to, learn and get into American culture, like that can be huge, and that can drive someone to really become highly proficient. Certainly that was the case in my case. I really wanted to integrate into Japanese culture. I was living in Japan, albeit that was one of the things, but for me, wanting to learn Japanese culture was a huge motivation to continue learning Japanese. But anyway, what I want to say is the interesting thing about English is that it is not a monolith. It's not just like the culture attached to the English language is no longer only British culture, because originally it was, right? The English language comes from the English who are in Britain. And so, in the really, really old definition, English language is attached to British culture, English culture, but that's no longer true. And it's not just English culture. It's not just American culture. It's not just Canadian culture. There's English media being produced in Singapore. There's English media being produced in Ireland, in Australia. A lot of these, inner circle English speaking nations are producing culture and media. But then even, my partner is from Switzerland, and you can watch TV in Switzerland and they'll be speaking French and German and sometimes English. And so it's really interesting because English is a global language now, and therefore you can teach English and introduce different kinds of cultural media in your class. And I think if you do that, you can really appreciate how international English has become. And it might even be more exciting for some of your students because you're not only getting, America, you're getting all of these other places too. And that's really cool. So that was my response or comment to Kumi's comment. Thank you so much for your words.
I think too, the idea of being an arbiter of the material that we show to our students and being really in touch with that information is quite true. I agree with Kumi that you need to know the information that you're showing. Kumi, turn on your camera. At the same time, what I see in, for example, when we're talking about sitcoms, Canada and Netflix itself has a really big hit with a TV show called Kim's Convenience. Kim's Convenience is about the Asian Canadian experience, and how sometimes it's not only about how they feel excluded, but how there is a unique sort of microcosm in growing up Asian in Canada. And then you see how Marvel, the Marvel universe, Marvel superhero movies are addressing this, and the reaction they got, the really supported reaction they got by actually trying to touch the Black experience with Black Panther. And then the surprising sort of response that they got, not just on a superhero level, but on the cultural level, with the release of Shang-Chi, that movie talking about a couple of Asian Americans and the Asian American experience as being part of the, not a variation of, but a part of American culture. But Kumi, you wanted to respond. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you, and I understand. Actually, I use a material in my class, introducing Englishes of the world. So the textbook is called World Adventures. And I do that, but no, I'm talking about younger kids, for junior high or high school level, they will consume, they will actually, I don't know how to say, diversity is important thing, and Japan is pushing it, but Japan is very conservative, and I don't think kids level, kids understanding level is there yet. So I think it is easier for us to for the teachers to provide more understandable and more obvious, more widely available English speaking cultures, which is Hollywood or whatever, is easier, and then kids will be more familiar with that. So if yes, it's cool that I have nothing to against non-natives, but I think important thing is how much do you think in English is kind of important, threshold for the qualified English teachers. But and also how much you understand about the English spoken culture, speaking cultures. So I'm thank you, but anyways, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I think you need to brush up on your cat. I think she wants to give you cat lessons now.
No, but no matter what, he wants to say what he wants to say.
This is good. I'm thinking in English. I bring it down to the word fluency. If you're fluent in English and you have your teaching chops, your linguistics, your practical applications in the classroom, you are qualified to be an English teacher, then that's why you're in this classroom. And I think how you approach your material, there's levels of approach that every teacher does because it's what's best for them. And I think, I completely agree with you. Oh, there's Mr. Meows.
And then I think it comes down, the bottom line is, what are the goals of the students? And so if you're working with kids and really you just want to get them excited about English and learning English, go full Hollywood. If that's what really makes them tick, if that's what excites them, then I would just, fully commit to that. Because your goal for them and their goal is to just interact with English and get pumped about English. But it depends on what the learner's goals are. And so I think that links nicely to again Browen's comment in the Zoom chat, which is that there are now many more NESB, I assume that's native English speakers.
Near English. Bronwyn, can you turn on your camera, because I forget what NESB.
I don't know what the B is.
What the B
I'm
is.
so sorry. This is a new acronym.
Are no NNSTs, non-native English speaking teachers. What's an Bronwyn? Welcome. Or at least your black screen is welcome. Or there you are, kinda. There you are.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Please open up your mic and just tell us your comment on the mic.
Non-English speaking background. Okay, sorry.
Non-English speaking background. I'm an ESL teacher from Australia. I have an ESL qualification for Australian high schools. So that's from 12 to 18. But I mainly teach adults here in Japan. I also teach kids phonics. And a lot of people are trying to get their kids to pass exams, they pass tests, get a good score, get into a good university. But a lot of our lessons seem to be designed to get kids to talk to native speakers. And that's a minority of English speakers now in the world.
Yep.
And in Asia, certainly.
Yeah. I teach business English, and some of my students have to speak to their counterparts in China.
Yep.
And they do it in English.
Yep.
Yes.
They do it in English. So there's no point me teaching them English, Australian or American idioms. That's pointless.
It's actually counterproductive,
Yeah.
because if they use one of those idioms and then the people don't understand them because they don't have that like, communication breaks down.
Yeah.
One of the sort of hidden obstacles that I think exists to a lot of issues, not just to this one, but it is that we are trying to approach 21st century issues. There's all this about 21st century skills and stuff, but things like global Englishes and issues even of racism and oppression, while we're trying to deal with the requirements of a 19th century English educational system. The reason why we teach idioms, or the reason why we teach spelling sometimes, honestly, or multiple choice systems, it's because it's easy to mark. It's easy to put against an answer key. You didn't get the word order to that idiom correct, so it's easy for me to put an X on it, as opposed to the actual administration, the textbook thinking, well, is this going to be useful in 2025 or 2026 when these kids graduate? That is one of the things that I think we don't pay enough attention to. We're working with an old system. Administrations are tethered to old ideas about what it is that students need to know, like standardized tests. I still see TOEIC posters all over my university that doesn't necessarily help them. So yeah, Brahman, I'm completely with you on that one. The idioms, why?
Yeah. And we don't need them to have no accent, or we don't need them to have a native style accent. We need them to have something that's understandable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Earlier in the show, I wanted to bring this up and then the conversation strayed, but now we're back. So Jennifer Jenkins created years ago this pronunciation guide for English as a lingua franca communication, and it's a little bit older and I doubt it's perfect, but one of the cool things about it is it identifies, based on research done with diverse speakers speaking together in an international communication setting, it identifies like what sounds are essential for pronunciation, like S and TH, if those get switched, like generally speaking, the meaning still gets across, but like if you switch like P and B, that's really not great. And certain people coming from certain cultural backgrounds will do that, or like H and F, if those get switched, like that's not good. So it sort of provides a framework by which you might try to teach pronunciation in a more lingua franca.
What resource is that? What resources is that? Is that a website? Did you bring that up?
It is an article. So but I bet it's old. So I bet you can find it. I can look for it.
Okay, and you pass it on to me. I'll pass it on to everyone. Linda, did you have a question?
I was just going to make a comment that sometimes native English pronunciation, if you're not a native English speaker, but you pronounce your words perfectly, if you don't have the grammar to go with it, if you don't understand the idioms, perfect pronunciation can be more harmful than less perfect pronunciation if you're not absolutely qualified as a native English speaker.
I think perfect, or the goal of perfect pronunciation, is absolutely harmful.
Yes.
That holding that goal and holding yourself against it, and then and even if you can't achieve it yourself, but thinking, oh, my friends don't have it either, and my sister doesn't have it either, so Japan will never learn how to speak English. It's cancerous. The whole idea of perfect pronunciation.
Whose
exactly.
pronunciation do you choose?
Like,
Mine,
Linda,
yours?
Your pronunciation is slightly different from mine. That's why I have a Canadian accent, and you have, I believe you're from Central
West
States?
Coast,
Okay.
US.
And Kelly's is slightly different. Who cares?
And British or Australian. These are all perfectly good, legitimate native English accents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kelly,
yeah.
Go. Go.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, look at the UK. Within the UK, there are so many different accents. As an American, I cannot speak to all of them, but there's a multitude of different English accents within England, the place that originated English. And yet, you know, we're all supposed to be studying this supposed standard form. And what does that even mean? Even native speakers have a huge variety in the pronunciation that they have.
And you can have two native English speakers talking to each other and not understanding each other at all.
Yep.
There is a great, I should try and find this too. There is a great, I think it's an SNL sketch where like some pilots are flying over Wales and they're giving instructions in English, and like it's funny, but it just sort of highlights how, you know, two people can be speaking English and it, you know, they might be native speakers and you still might have intelligibility issues. And I think it is really important for native speakers too, to acknowledge that when you're talking to people from different linguocultural backgrounds, you as a native speaker need to sort of modulate the way that you use language, the way that you're speaking, the speed, the idioms, or like the sort of language, the level of vocabulary that you are using. I think it's really important for native speakers to be cognizant of this idea of global English as just as much as it is for people who are learning English from now.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to say thank you very much. So for anyone who still is willing to turn on their camera, I want to give Kelly a round of applause and give you guys a chance to open up your cameras to do that. Okay, here we go.
Thank you.
I'm sure everybody had. I got a lot of really good comments in Facebook and from the people that that left.
Sorry, it took me a while.
No, she's just as well, actually. Why don't we hold up the child and the cat? I think that. There you go. There's the cat.
Oh my god!
And then there she is. Oh, there she is. Okay. Cat meet child, child meet cat. And I want to say thank you to Kelly. I want to just say one more time, thank you everyone for coming, but also I want to point out that if you have a spare moment to think about it, and maybe if you actually do have some spare change, and maybe better than spare change, if you could acknowledge what Joel can use as in terms of a helping hand. The email is right there, steven.herder@gmail.com, and send along what it is that you think would be able to help Joel as he tries to recuperate through the year and go through what should be a very, very, and then there's Mac. I know Mac. There's Mac. Mac, hi Mac.
Gosh,
I love Mac. I love Max. I love Mac and I love Max. Okay, thank you very much, Kelly. I also wanted to, just to take one more minute, tell everyone next week, okay, we will be the first OTJtv episodes in March, and it will have the crew from Lost in Citations, Jonathan Schachter and Christopher Haswell, two guys have been putting out a podcast now weekly for the past, I think, year and a half, maybe, and I was actually on it. Yay. And I thought it would be really fun to have them on. After that, and by the way, that will be on the second Saturday. That'll be on the second Saturday of the month. And immediately after that, on the third Saturday, will be Yoshi Grote. plenary level speaker at the JELT National Conference 2020. I was most impressed by what she had to say, and finally had the courage to actually ask her to come along and speak to us at OTJtv. And then after Yoshi Grote will be the one and only Melody Cook. Dr. Melody Cook will be coming to visit us and talking to us about all of her amazing projects. And from there, we've just got a whole bunch of people that are coming, and I hope I can just keep up with it, because I don't think this luggage is going to get any smaller under my eyes. But thank you all for coming along. Thank you again to Kelly. And yeah, everyone, big wave to the camera. Okay. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.